And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our stately office hours. This is a weekly live stream where we talk about what's going on in X State, what's coming up, and answer any questions that you have for us. And this week, we've had a bunch of fantastic questions ahead of time, which, if you've seen these streams before, you know that I love that. So if you didn't manage to ask that kind of burning question that you already had for us, you can always tweet us using the hashtag Stately Office Hours. I will pop a little banner up there for you so you can see what Stately Office Hours looks like. And you can also join our Discord where we've got, if you go to discord.gg/xstate, you can join our Stately Discord, and we have a channel in there for office hours if you have any questions on there. And thank you to those of you that already asked your questions on there. It's great for us to have it all lined up already. And the Discord really is the best place if you want to ever chat to any of us or ask your X-State related questions and just hang out with the wonderful people that we have in the community there, because everyone is really nice and really friendly in there. We've even got a new beginners channel as well. So if you really just feel like you don't know anything about X-State, a bit like me, I'm getting there, but you can ask your questions in there. So first up, if you haven't joined us before, you might be wondering, who are these lovely people on this screen here with me today? To start off, I am Laura Kalbag, and I do developer and designer relations. Next up, David, who are you?
Hey, I am the founder of this whole awesome team of people and thing, making development better for everyone. And yeah, that's me.
And Matt, who are you?
I'm a developer in Stately, and I've been working with Xstate for about a year or so.
And Andres, or Matthias, who are you?
I'm just a meddling kid helping out those awesome people on the team. So.
Meddling kid. He really undersells himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought we might be fun to start off this week talking about some of the topics that we've been discussing on the Discord this week. So I was wondering if any of you would like to talk about the Redux integration that folks have been chatting about.
I'll start. So this is something I've been kind of chucking around this week. I've been having a chat with Matej today about it. I'm kind of interested to get David's thoughts on it as well. Xstate and Redux, you kind of sometimes think of them as opposites. You know, you think of them as, okay, we should either use Xstate in our app or we should use Redux in our app. But the truth is that they're pretty similar in quite a few ways. They're very similar in the way that they both take events. They're not like direct state manipulation tools or anything like that, like Zustand or other kind of React recoil or things like that. And they both use kind of Redux uses reducers, whereas Xstate uses state machines in terms of calculating the next state in kind of a pure way. So I was thinking, and I've been playing around with Xstate Redux kind of thing where you can mash them both together. And I was kind of wondering, David, from your perspective, what your general thoughts are on the integration and how you imagine that might look.
I think it's pretty awesome that you got actions to work using that Xstate to Redux integration. When I used to talk about Xstate to Redux and how you could use Xstate within Redux, it was mostly in the context of, let's assume your machine doesn't have any actions or side effects, or at least when it does have actions, you're going to handle them in a thunk or something later. Like, who knows? But the whole idea that you have where you're actually integrating an interpreter into it, it makes it like a lot more powerful. Now with Redux, you still have that single global store, and Xstate is sort of a completely different philosophy from that. However, it's still useful to be able to, just use machines that you've already created or that you even want to create within a Redux context. So I think that the idea is really promising, and I'm looking forward to seeing it evolve. Because I know that there's a lot of people using Redux today who think state machines are awesome. And even in the Redux toolkit, there's been proposals of having some sort of state machine-like syntax. It's been around there for a few months. It hasn't gone very far, but giving developers the option to just stick Xstate in there is pretty awesome. And it's a win for both Redux and XState users.
For sure. And I know Mateusz as well. You've been around Redux Saga for a long time and helping maintain that, and one of the many packages that you maintain. And I'm what I really like about the idea of using like a state machine is that you get to co-locate your side effect with your reducer essentially, and you get to kind of just have your cake and eat it too. Whereas before you would have your reducer, which contained your logic, and then your Saga, which like contains your side effects and ran those. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, so I guess I always treated reducers more like a storage really. So I didn't really put a lot of logic there. So that just lived like where those actions were created, or like in a Saga, or like in XState, but it wasn't as managed by reducers, at least in my case. But there are a lot of approaches towards Redux, so it's all fine. But yeah, collocating both seems like a very good approach, and I enjoy it. Like I have really enjoyed your proposals. I have been looking into the implementation and the whole like Twitter discussion today. So I really think that's promising.
Nice. So an XState Redux package somewhere in our future. That sounds exciting.
Then you better be following these lot on Twitter if you want to be
also
following all of these interesting discussions.
Yeah.
Well, the another thing that was being discussed on the Discord this week is splitting up machines into smaller processes that can be run on lambdas. Now, someone actually explain what a lambda is as well for people that might not know.
David, you can take this one.
Yeah, sure. So a lambda is, that's sort of a AWS term. So I would expect Matt to. I come from Microsoft world, so we don't talk about those lambdas. But anyway, they're serverless functions, and basically it's a short-lived function where basically you're sending something to a virtual machine. You could think of it theoretically, and so that's executing something and then returning. So it's not meant to be like a typical server-side app where it's always running, because that's expensive. Serverless functions only run for a short amount of time. So that's why they're sort of called stateless, because it's like starting brand new every time. And so a common use case has come up where you want to use state machines in that serverless context, either to run some sort of workflow or some process, whether it's short-lived or long-lived. And there's a bunch of challenges and interesting solutions to that. I know Matt has been thinking of a lot of them. I've experimented with using durable entities for that. And the whole idea is that you're basically reading persisted state, applying an event to that based on the state machine. So the state machine, remember, can be used in a given a state in an event, what is the next state that's going to happen, and what actions are going to happen as well. And so you could use it just like that, and then returning immediately. And so that's why I think that state machines can work well as a automated workflow tool. And so that's something that we're going to be experimenting with that a lot more. I know Matt has more thoughts on that if you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, like in general, the whole idea of using XState to represent long-running processes or processes that or flows that contain many individual processes is really exciting. So you take like a user, for instance. Let's imagine you could represent a user with a let's say they are in the not created state first, and then you create them and they have all these attributes with a create event, let's say. Then you validate their email address, for instance. They go into the email validated state. And all of these, even though you think of state machines usually and state charts, like all of David Harrell's examples, for instance, are about kind of mechanical objects like microwaves and watches and airplane systems, that sort of thing. And all of those you think of as long-running processes that happen over a long period of time. Whereas with this, you're breaking your state machine down into smaller, you treat the state machine as kind of like the overall flow of the app, and you stitch together all of these little processes from it. So the create user process from that bit of the flow. Then when the user is in this bit, then you have the validate email flow. I just think that there's a with serverless functions in particular, you get a lot of trouble where your system is distributed in many places, and the logic is sort of like stuffed in all of these little functions all over the web. Whereas having a general idea of the whole flow is really kind of cool, and yeah, I like that a lot.
That makes sense. And David Harrell, or Harrell, however he said, is the guy who wrote the paper on state charts, and that is why you will often hear people working with XState referring to his work.
The original David, before the pretender came along.
Do you have to be called David to work on state charts?
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. It's a requirement.
So another discussion that's been happening on Discord is about using state.changed and state.next events to handle disabling buttons. So who wants to tell us a bit more about that?
Oh, that's a fun one. So yeah, there we go. So yesterday I did a stream with Jake Dom. It was a really impromptu stream, but it was really interesting because he was new to XState, I was new to Vue, and so we just sort of collaborated together and made a sample slider application and gradually built up more and more features with XState and with Vue. And so one of the things that are actually, just kidding, I don't think it was in yesterday's stream, but I'm mentioning it just so that you check it out in our channel. It should be recorded there. It's just under an hour, but you could do the 2x speed like I usually do and go through it. But I mean, it's full of really interesting stuff. But no, on Monday with the keyframers, we did a stream where we were tackling the 7 GUIs, which is a project made by Eugen Kiss of harder and harder user interfaces to implement. And so the simplest one is just a counter app, then it goes to a temperature converter, and then a flights booking tool. So it's getting harder and harder. And we were doing that with XState and not using any frameworks, just XState. And one of the tricks I showed in the flights booking app was disabling buttons. Now, you could basically do what everyone does nowadays and duplicate logic. Like, if this, then this should be disabled, and you're basically copying and pasting the validation logic from your wherever you're putting your application logic. However, in XState, you could represent that can be or can't be clicked sort of automatically. And so basically the way you do that is you say, given I'm in this state, will firing this event cause the state to change? And so that answers like a vast majority of should this button be disabled questions. And so I showed a trick for that where it's basically machine.transition states potential event dot changed. And if dot changed is true, you know that sending an event will change the state. If it's false, it won't. So you could disable that button. Now, we've been thinking in the ideas channel about just having this built into the state object. So you could say states.can change, or I forget what the method name for that is proposed to be. But yeah, you could do that automatically. And so that's something we're thinking about. And now it's something that, since a lot of people like it, and we've been talking about it for months, really, I'm really itching to just make a PR and, see where that goes.
It's very neat. There's, for those who want this goodness right now as well, someone who's in our Discord a lot, Van Tanev, I'm going to post this in the Office Hours channel, has made a React hook for this called use is XState transition available, which is really, really neat. It basically does the logic that we're proposing to add by checking if any conditions run or checking if any guards run. And that, it just returns a Boolean. So you can say, should you disable this button? Just use the hook and calculate it based on your machine. Very, very neat.
Very cool. So we have got some questions that were asked earlier in the week, but first of all, I think that this is a really fun little question from Dale in the comments here on YouTube. And Dale asks, hey guys, obviously there is a meaning behind the X in XState. I wonder what it is.
So honestly, I created after I just nabbed the npm package name. So XState back in 2015, it was originally called Estado, which is Spanish for states, and I thought it was cool because you have ES like ECMAScript and Estado, and anyway, that project was pretty close to the original XState. It had like a custom DSL and stuff like that, and it had all of 7 stars for like a couple years. It was very unpopular. Anyway, I'm not attributing the rename to its growing popularity, but I thought like, all right, let's actually make this state related. I found that XState and having an X in the name just seemed cool to me for whatever reason. It seems like a good idea to change the package to that. And then like I sort of backtracked and added some meaning to that X, where X stands for a lot of things. You could call it like trans, like X, like Xing, and Xing sign is a crossing sign. So just going between. And so I like to think of the X as meaning transition. And so X states sort of means like a transition of states, but honestly, it's just there to look cool. But
yeah, in my mind, it's almost like you would say like a X state or Y state, as I say this state or that state, which also makes sense.
Yeah. So it's basically add your own meaning. It's sort of like, what does the X stand for in MobX? Why is it called Redux with an X at the end? So I think that there's also a play on original state management libraries there.
X just being a cool letter in the alphabet.
I guess so. Yeah.
Actually, this ties in quite well to a question that Jan asked us earlier in the week. Given the increasingly ambitious plans for XState, including all the research being done with regards to actors and more, if you were going to create XState today, are there things you would have done differently?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. If I were going to create XState today, are there things you would have done differently? So the things that we are, or that we're looking back on and doing differently, they're not hugely different things. And that's things that we're going to be putting in version 5. And so we, not much is really going to change between version 4 and version 5. But I would actually say that there are not things I would do differently. The core of XState is all about state machines, state charts, actor model, and just the idea of like just building this events-based architecture for your application logic. And those things are really, really old concepts. And these are things where if I try to invent my own solution and do it myself, then yeah, in hindsight, I would change a lot of things. But in this, we take a very cautious approach, and we see like, all right, instead of going on the whims of someone's idea, just look at prior arts, look at what's been done before, and also look at the computer science behind everything. So we're not just examining JavaScript or TypeScript, but also different languages, historical uses, and things like that. And that's why I think that XState as is going to pretty much be like that for many years to come. And in fact, it's been pretty much the same API for many years so far already. So I don't think I would have done things differently. I think a couple of things I would have done differently are just think about the actor model a lot sooner. Because originally when XState was created, it was not created with the actor model in mind. So actually spawning and invoking actors was sort of tacked on to XState as an afterthought. And in XState version 5, we are rethinking that and making that a core part of the library. So that's probably the biggest thing I would change.
How about you, Matthias and Matt? Are there any things that you would do differently? Do you want to say it to David's face?
Well, I'm just hanging on. Like Matthias has a lot more experience than I am. I'm just kind of hanging on these guys' brilliance, really. So I'll let you handle that.
That's a hard question. I don't think there are any like big topics to change. I think we can like standardize a few things and unify them. For example, I have posted this week in our other repository that is called RFCs and an RFC about error handling. So this is something that I really like to revisit in the next major version, because well, some of that is a breaking change, so we really can't do that right now. But it's a vastly important topic, because I believe that for any developer, it's really important to have a clear mental model about like error handling and how a particular piece of code handles that. And because X state is just like orchestrates the logic of the application. So we kind of hand our code to it for it to be executed at particular times. It's important to get that story right, and be sure that it works in the very same way in all instances. So for example, like it should be cohesive between actions, guards, stuff like that. And right now there's a little bit underspecified maybe. So yeah, a clear story and a like documentation page about that would be really cool.
Yeah,
Well, that's
and
the thing. Nothing starts out perfect, and the
sure.
great thing is that we can evolve everything to be better and add in things. That's the great thing about having a flexible team as well.
I was also going to mention like just documentation. That's something in hindsight that I wish I could have done differently, because I'm just throwing all these concepts at people. And so a common thought is XState has a large learning curve, but really getting started with XState does not require that many concepts, especially if you worked with other state management libraries before. So I think documentation is a big hindsight thing that we could have done differently.
So I'm going to go ask Jan's questions out of order, because there were two. So I'm going to go back to number one now. And Jan asked, there are a lot of new API ideas being discussed these days from both the Stately team and community members, which is very exciting and insightful. But could you talk a bit about your thought processes in weighing the balance between an expanded API surface and developer ergonomics?
Yeah, so just from my perspective, I'm always hesitant to expand the API surface and tack on like just little features and things like that, just because it's very easy for a feature to seem like a good idea at the time, and then later it'd be like, well, now we have this dead weight and we can't really remove it without it being a breaking change. And so also for onboarding new developers, it's it's just more things to learn, and it increases the surface area of the API. So that's why when we consider like how we can add these features to the API surface area, first we play around with it in userland. We think like, okay, we can do this in userland. We don't need to add it to the core library. And with a lot of features, that's pretty true. And so we could either provide helpers as part of the core library in which they're opt-in, or like Van Tenev's XState helpers library, it could be provided as part of a separate repo. So other things are, we of course adhere to the SCXML spec as well as we can. We deviate slightly sometimes, but if something goes completely against what the SCXML spec says, then we just don't add it at all. Also, the core API of XState is, you have states and events. So if a feature can be represented, and it's a core feature, if it could be represented as events, just like after transitions are, then it seems like a good candidate to add to the API, because we're not really introducing anything new. It's basically sort of a sugar, but a really common sugar. And so, for example, when I proposed the API for seeing if an event will, change the state, that's not introducing anything new. We're just adding a nice to have feature that you can implement yourself right now. And I'm sure that there's other thoughts on that by the team.
A lot of, especially the new stuff that I've been thinking about is kind of stuff that's outside of XState core, like, because when you think of like adding stuff to core is always a really tricky balance. And, You need to run the gauntlet of running it by Mateusz and then running it by David, and very few things get through that, which is good. But especially the things that I've been thinking about recently are kind of more about XState query, perhaps, or XState form, or XState router, and about integrations. And I think that's where a lot of space can be expanded into. There feels like there's a lot of developer and sort of design space there to explore. And especially when it, like a lot of, certainly when I feel like I'm developing with XState, I sometimes feel like I need to use, or I want to use XState for everything, you know, because you get so many benefits with it. You get the visualization, you can, and especially what I really want to do is use it with a router. So there's a lot of design space there, and there we feel a bit more able to spread out a little bit. You know, you can expand a bit more. You can try new things. You don't have to make sure everything is as tight as it is in core. And especially with core, we are thinking about bringing, I think, especially terminology a bit closer together. So, for instance, the idea being in V5, maybe more things are called an actor instead of a service, let's say, or we can possibly, currently activities are deprecated as well. We can possibly get rid of those in favor of calling everything possibly an actor or a service yet. Yeah. But we're constantly thinking, how can we bring down the amount of terms that you need to remember, you know, and how can we do that best? Like, I think that's an important battle that we need to be fighting at all times.
Yeah, how can we make it easier for new people to get involved and not have that steep learning curve that people have been struggling with? Now, moving more on to talking about the, I guess, format of the repository themselves, because we had some quite interesting questions that people love asking, and Horatio is one of them. Why are you using a flat folder structure in your code base, and how can I convince my team to do it? So Horatio obviously thinks that it's a good idea.
I actually made a joke tweet about this recently, where it's like, just put everything in source. But yeah, I don't think we actually really ever discussed it. I started out the visualizer, and then I made it public once we got the entire stately team on board, and everything was just sort of flat in the source. And so no one really talked about it. We just kept adding files there. And I think one of the things is that we search for files not by navigating through a navigation panel, but rather, if you're using VS Code or any sort of IDE, you could just press Command P or Control P and then just search for the file. Or maybe it's Command Shift P, I forget what it is. It's all muscle memory at this point. But yeah, if you know the file name, then you could just find it there. So I think in the old days, we used to like just organize everything in hierarchies because we didn't have that functionality. But now, like, having it in a flat structure really removes that mental barrier of where do I put this file or where do I find this file. Also, I used to work in a library, and libraries are not like boxes of books and like shelves within shelves. It's all just a single, row of shelves, and all of the books, even though they're different categories, they're still at the same level. And that was actually my first job as a, librarian, like book putter away or whatever you call that. But yeah, so I just really like a flat structure.
I love that you went from maintaining libraries to maintaining libraries. That's quite
yeah. Does it mean you're really good at naming things?
Oh gosh, no.
And along the similar lines, we have a question which from Encuthbert, who I believe is Natalie. How do you think about growing the library while keeping it lean for bundle sizes?
I think Matisse and I have plans for that. In fact, in version 5, we're splitting things up into modules, so everything is going to be import as needed. Right now in version 4, all of the main stuff is just imported directly into index.js. It's not very modular. And so for version 5, we're just, splitting that. In fact, I have a PR right now, which Matisse is reviewing, where even actions, like you could import individual actions. So if you're never going to use a certain subset of actions, those are never going to be in the bundle. And so we're exploring ways to just make it more and more modular. And I think we have a good way forward. Plus, deprecating stuff like activities and things like that is really going to help with that. So
cool. So completely changing the topic with another question from Horatio. Can you explain your approach on testing the visualizer? Are you using Cypress for all unit and integration testing?
it's a Matt question.
This is a Mateusz question, actually. This is a Cypress genius here.
Right here.
I would say that for now we just implement basic functionality, and we didn't hit yet any like maintainability problems. But of course, testing is important. We have a bunch of somewhat sanity tests, and for a few features, but and they are all Cypress tests. So the whole app just initializes and we test specific things, but we do not have a lot of them at the moment. So it is what it is. We are just trying to deliver features first.
Cool.
By the way, we're not using XState test just yet in the visualizer. In fact, we're using Cypress, which honestly, Cypress is pretty awesome. It makes testing so easy to write, and we're just trying to take ideas from that and see what the next version of XState test could look like and how that could help us write tests with that ease.
Yeah, we picked Cypress too, as opposed to something like testing library React or something, because we have quite a lot of complex stuff that, especially the Monaco editor that we need to test, that you just can't test in a node environment. Elk, for instance, we need to test like how the nodes display, moving things around on the canvas, and Cypress just felt like the best thing. We're not doing end-to-end tests with it, so we're not testing the backend. We do have a different backend repository, which is private, which we use Jest for. But yeah, Cypress has been a joy so far.
Cool. We have so many questions today that it's so wonderful that we're going to get through them all. But I'm going to try, and so I'm going back to earlier when we were discussing Redux, and Carlos asks, any chance to get the Redux integration flow on Vuex?
Probably, yes. Never used Vuex before. Yes, I think so. Let's do Redux first and let's see how we go. There's still lots of questions to answer with that one, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah, I feel like it is possible.
Cool. Eric asks, are you optimistic that TypeScript will get better at consuming and understanding machine definitions?
I think Matthias could answer this best.
I'm rather pessimistic about that. But to answer in a more encouraging way for all of us, I think we can do things to improve our typing experience. I just don't think that TypeScript will make it any easier. So given how the question was asked, no, it will not get better at consuming and understanding machine definitions on its own, but maybe we can help it.
There are some things it could do, like having like support for optional generics would be really useful, or inferred some generics. There are things it could do, but yeah, I don't think hoping that it's going to get better is a good strategy.
Yeah, but I mean, there are some experiments by Devin, who's making TX states, where he's just doing some crazy magic, making that type inference a lot better. But I think the future is honestly going to be a mix of just better types in version 5, along with XState parser or some sort of lints plugin that helps you out as you're programming your machines, and also the visual editor, where you cannot make a mistake in the visual editor, because now we have all of these things to tell you, like, all right, you cannot name this node that conflicts with that, et cetera, et cetera. And we could just be a lot smarter about how you build your machines, and you don't have to code, because coding means typos, and typos right now they slip through the cracks when you're creating your machine definition. So yeah.
So Shane asks, and Shane was really determined asking this both on Twitter and in the YouTube comments, so I did catch it. Any plans for any more actor model style APIs? Seem to me missing things like you'd see in Akka, like actor selection. I hope it's pronounced Akka.
I think so too. Yeah, Akka. The short answer is yes, and these are things that we're slowly experimenting with because we want to land these in V5, which is why V5 is taking a while, because we're really considering just like all of the use cases of how people would use actors, and some of these things we're slowly introducing to version 4 as well, just to see what will make using actors easier in XState version 4. Now, I personally am really influenced by Akka, so a lot of the naming conventions and the structure and things like that are taken from Akka, which I feel is a good bet since Akka is by far the most popular actor model framework right now, currently for Scala and Java, and there's an Akka.net, but there doesn't seem to be one for JavaScript. So yeah, going to be exploring that a lot more. And some of these experiments I am putting into XActor, which I have to continue working on. And then from XActor, which is like XState without the state machine parts, we absorb that into XState version 5. So we'll be playing around more with that.
Cool. Eric asks, and I know this is a joke, but when can we use XState in CSS? Because you say this like it's a joke, but I'm pretty sure I have seen David do this already.
Yeah, it's totally not a joke. The data attributes are a thing, and they're really, really useful. In fact, if you use state.toStrings, you could join them with whatever, a space or a comma, and stick them in a data attribute. And CSS data attributes are really powerful because you could match on, if you have space delimited, whatever they're called, identifiers in there, you could like just say if this data state includes this one state, or if the entire state is this state, or if it starts with this, or if it ends with this. And so using data states and XState is a really powerful combination that I've used a bunch. So
yeah, CSS selectors are incredibly powerful, especially if you know how to use them well. Let me just go through lots of lovely comments going on. I'm just trying to get to some of the questions. I think I've caught all of them. If I haven't, people nudge me. Let me know if I've missed out any of your questions.
A serious one from Eric, which was at 218, which was, have you seen a domain where XState is not a good fit? Eric asking the soft questions and the hard questions. David, what do you reckon to that one? That's
a really good question. In the past, I would have said yes, because it's one of those things where if you don't have like a lot of finite states in your application, then you're better off just doing things in a plain reducer. But right now, XState, and this is new as of the last 2 months, I guess, but XState can be used as basically a normal reducer. You could have what's called like a combinatorial state machine, or a single state, and then just have your actions in there depending on what events comes through, and then you could slowly refactor to add more and more states. Also, XState is since it's based on the actor model, and you could invoke and spawn different actors. It's you could what was I trying to say? It's sort of like an escape hatch, really. So you could, if you want to do something that doesn't fall neatly into the finite state machine part of things, you could invoke a callback, which Matt loves to do, or a promise, or just a service, and yeah, you could use it that way. So I wouldn't say that there's a domain where XState doesn't fit. I would just say that there is a, I guess, a team concern where XState doesn't fit. So if right now you have to basically onboard the entire team and you're trying to ship something as soon as possible, then personally use what you know best, whether that's Redux, Vuex, or just plain hooks, or however you're managing state, and have XState be a refactor target when you have more time and you want some more of that safety and other features like visualization, and organization. So yeah, otherwise I would say XState's a good fit.
Yeah,
Right,
there are also a couple of like a couple of places actually, like we were talking about before, like with the running XState on a Lambda, for instance, where it's not necessarily not a good fit, but you just need to jump through a couple of hoops that I think we could make easier. And as well, if you think of XState the library and then XState the documentation, is kind of they help each other, right? And so in some places our documentation is better than others, and for some use cases it's clearer that it's useful for others. So for instance, in backend and Node and that kind of thing, we don't necessarily say right on the front page you can use XState in the backend, whereas many people are, and many people use it very successfully. So I think there are ways that we could be more convincing as a library to convince you that it is a good fit, because I think for pretty much all non-trivial cases, XState will be a good fit.
Cool. I'm just actually on that topic of the documentation, because as Natalie mentioned in the comments, can we add a note to discourage the use of activities in the docs? Yes, and we'll get better at making sure that we're telling people what is good to be using right now, and if there are more things that we're going to deprecate, we will make sure that we include it in there and that you don't get bitten by that again.
Yeah, and we also just recently landed a PR where if you're using activities in TypeScript, deprecation notices will show, and it will recommend that you use something else.
Yeah, I think that was literally yesterday you added that PR.
So I wish you got bit by this yesterday.
Shane asks, is there a go-to example of using the visualizer from within a Node.js program?
Not yet. WebSocket support is something that is planned. Right now, speaking of the visualizer, our priority is fixing bugs and adding like just high priority functionality to the visualizer. By the way, we're planning on making the big release. So right now you're playing around with the visualizer beta, even though it doesn't say beta, but we're going to release at the end of the month. So that's our priority for now. If we could squeeze in WebSocket support in there, then that's great, but it's not super priority for the release right now.
That's actually another question that I have just realized that I missed, was any news to the new stately viz component, which I'm assuming is what Marcel's talking about.
Yeah, so also like just releasing this to NPM, that's something that is going to come later. Right now, this application is a next.js application, so it's expected that you're running the visualizer in its entirety. As far as separating it out into components, that's more of a refactor target that we'll hopefully tackle in the future. But yeah, when we have time, it's not the most priority right now.
Natalie asks, do you have a roadmap for the docs? Which I guess is probably a question for me. And I would say no, not at the moment, but actually that's a really good idea. And I'll make sure that we get something up and sorted as quickly as possible. Eric asks, when can we get the visualizer in VS Code, Matt?
Soon. Mateusz, you were experimenting with the visualizer in a Chrome extension this week, right? Or on Monday?
Yeah, I did, and the experiment maybe didn't went as well as I have hoped for a day of work, but I have successfully kind of hooked things up without the final piece of the puzzle. But it was just about figuring the proper APIs to be used in the extension, because like the learning materials for those are just maybe not. I don't want to say that they are not ideal, but there are just not as many of them, because just writing extensions is not as popular as writing applications. So, it's just a matter of figuring out the correct APIs to use for like messaging between the extension panel and some additional scripting. and also preparing like a build setup in our repository to just bundle it appropriately for the extension. Because right now I was just trying to hack it around using an iframe, and while doable, I think the ideal way would be to just pack the whole thing and make it usable even when offline. So yeah, and I will continue working on that because that was part of our like Monday hacking. So hopefully soon-ish I will be able to deliver that. Just need to figure out a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
The VS Code one was my Monday hacking too. There's still some challenges to figure out the VS Code extension. The primary one is figuring out the parser. Basically, once you have a reliable way to parse all the information from a file, then it will be pretty easy to just stitch it together. But it's quite a hard problem, basically. So that'll be my Monday, I think, after the weekend.
And the weekend is coming up very quickly at this rate. And on that note, if anyone has any more questions, you know where to ask them at this point. But otherwise, I think we should wrap up for this week, and we'll have lots of time to answer your questions again next week. Thank you so much to everyone who asked such great questions this week. It's been fabulous. It's been fun. And we will catch you all. Oh, just as I'm saying we should catch you all. Come on, Francois, you got in there. I'm going to have to answer your question. Do you guys have thoughts on the opportunities for stately enabled by GitHub's code spaces? VS Code extensions, in my honest opinion, are about to become even another magnitude of more powerful.
I haven't played around with code spaces that much, but yeah.
The basic question is if VS Code extensions will run in them. It is Visual Studio Code, but it still might be constrained a little bit on their side. But other than that, like, it's Visual Studio Code, so whatever you can do in Visual Studio Code, you should be able to roughly do there. Yeah, we'll see how many people will also use them, because that will be kind of a paid feature for the most part. So but it's really cool that you can already kind of open any repository on GitHub within that kind of environment, maybe without being able to run the project as in an actual code space, but you can already explore it using that. It's really cool, and I have been already using that, so I highly recommend.
Fantastic. So now, after our full sending, I can really wrap us up for real. Thank you again, everyone. We really appreciate the questions. It's been really nice chatting with you all, and we will see you again, same time next week. Bye-bye.
See you all.